In this video, we're going to talk about subtracting polynomials. Again, nothing too challenging with this. It's basically just distribution and combining like terms, very similar to what we did when we were adding polynomials. So if you look at this example here, it says you can subtract a polynomial by distributing the subtraction sign to each term. That is very, very important, of the polynomial that is being subtracted. So here's an example. We have a trinomial minus another trinomial. So we're going to distribute the subtraction sign to each term of the subtracted polynomial. So if you can think about this, this is really, the subtraction sign is like a -1 here. So what we're doing is we're distributing that -1 to each term in the second trinomial there. So my first trinomial, 3x squared plus 2x minus 6, nothing really special happening there. When I distribute this -1, I have -1 times x squared, so -1x squared. -1 times 2x, so -2x. And then -1 times 3, so -3. Okay. Common mistake we often see is that people will just distribute the -1 to the x squared here, but then they will forget to distribute that -1 to the 2x and the 3. So just make sure you're very careful with that. You're distributing it to everything in that second set of parentheses. And then if you want, you can group your like terms. So 3x squared and then -1x squared. Then I would have positive 2x and then -2x. And then lastly, I would have the constants, -6 and -3. Very important that you make sure you keep your negative signs on each term. And again, as you notice, I go from highest power to lowest power as I write that. And then now I'll just simplify. 3x squared minus 1x squared would be 2x squared. 2x minus 2x is actually 0. Those will cancel there. And then -6 minus 3 is -9. And that's okay if your two middle terms cancel. That happens from time to time. Okay, so as you can see with subtracting, you're basically just distributing that -1, and then you're combining your like terms similar to what we did in addition. So we'll just do maybe 2 examples here, and then we'll move on. So this is a negative sign here, which again is a -1. If you need to write that in, go ahead and do that. Distribute it. So my first set of parentheses, I'm just going to rewrite here. -1 times 2p squared would be -2p squared. -1 times -5p is positive 5p. And -1 times +1 would be -1. So I distribute. And then I will combine my like terms. 6p squared minus 2p squared is 4p squared. Positive 4p plus 5p would be positive 9p. And then lastly, positive 5 minus 1 would be 4. So that would be my answer there. If you look at number 2, you can see it's slightly different. Here we're not just distributing a -1, we're actually distributing a -2, but it's no different than anything we've done previously with distribution. So -2 times -3x squared would be positive 6x squared. -2 times -5 would be positive 10. Then I'm going to write it in standard form, so greatest power to smallest power. So 6x squared would come first, then 9x. That's a power of 1 there. And then I'm going to go ahead and combine my constants. 2 and 10 would combine to be 12. So I have this quadratic trinomial is what that would be called. Okay, so again, nothing too challenging here with subtraction, I wouldn't think. You're basically just distributing, whether it's a -1 or a -2. Here would be a -1. Here you have 2 of them, a -1 and a -3, so you would need to do double distribution. But we're basically just distributing and combining like terms, which again is something we've been practicing for a little while now. So now I just want to try one more problem. Maybe let's do the more challenging problem here, number 2 at the bottom, where you're adding and subtracting polynomials at the same time. So here I would say the biggest hint would be just make sure you're paying attention to your signs, your negative signs especially. So in this first one, or this first part of the problem, I'm going to distribute this 2. And then I also have a -1 here that I'll need to distribute. And then if you want, you can think about this like a +1, and you're also distributing that as well. So 2 times -x squared is -2x squared. 2 times 2x is 4x. Then I move on. Negative 1 times negative 1x squared would be positive 1x squared. Negative 1 times 3x would be negative 3x. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. And then if I distribute a 1 here, I have plus 2x plus 4. So I'm distributing a 2, a negative 1, and then a positive 1. And I get this long expression here. Then for my last step, I will combine like terms. I'm going to want to write it in standard form. So I'm going to look for the highest degree, which I see is a degree of 2. So I'm going to add those together first. Negative 2x squared plus 1x squared is negative 1x squared. 4x minus 3x plus 2x. We have 3 linear terms there. So 4x minus 3x is 1x. And 1x plus 2x would be 3x. And then lastly, I have my constants, a positive 1 and a positive 4, which would be positive 5. And that would be my answer there. All right, so that's an example of where you have both addition and subtraction. Here we had addition, here we had subtraction. But very similar to the previous problems, you just need to make sure you're distributing correctly and then combining your like terms correctly.